Okay, good afternoon. This is Richard Hsu, host of Hsu Untied. Today I'm very pleased to have with me as my guest Natalie Rainer, who's a partner at K&L Gates. Natalie, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much. I'm honored to be here.
Oh, thank you. Well, Natalie, let's see. You have what I think is one of the more interesting and unusual backgrounds that I've come across. Tell me a little bit about, I see you were a graduate of the French Culinary Institute. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, thank you. So I attended the French Culinary Institute, which now goes by a different name, when I was living in New York City in 2002. I never went with the intention of being a professional chef. My dad was a professional chef, and
Oh,
my mom went to cooking school too. So it had always been like an ambition of mine to attend cooking school.
hmm.
And the program I picked was more for like amateurs. So I would work at Human Rights Watch during the day. And then on Tuesday and Thursday evenings from 5 to 10 p.m., I would do this
Huh,
cooking school.
huh. And did you enjoy it? What was it like?
I loved it. I mean, it was like, a mini version, I think, of professional culinary school. So it was like knife skills. We did a class on like sauces, and then a class on stocks and salads and braising, frying. So it was the name of the program. And so you learned, different techniques every class. And those techniques are really translatable to like any cuisine. So while this was a French program, I used these skills to make, Italian and, even Chinese and all kinds of other foods.
Huh.
So it's been super useful, and I cook almost every day.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's if there's one skill that's useful, it's cooking. You got to eat every day. So,
Exactly. You
what
can
about, did you ever get a chance to work as a chef in any way?
I didn't work as a chef, but I worked in restaurants as a waitress
Uh-huh.
in New York and in Berkeley, in DC, I think, for a little bit. And I sort of grew up in this industry because my dad managed hotels. And
Uh,
so the hotel that I grew up in, we had two restaurants. One was pretty casual, and the other one was quite fancy. And there was also like a huge Sunday brunch every week, and we had a convention space. And I had free reign where I could walk in the back of, the restaurants and see all the magic happening. So I was like, I did observe all the cooking, throughout my whole life.
uh,
Uh, and yeah, I mean, it always appealed to me to learn the skills, but not to work in a restaurant. And my dad actually discouraged me from being in the restaurant business professionally because he had experienced like how volatile it is.
right. So, what is it you enjoy cooking the most now, would you say,
Um,
today?
I just got a cookbook by Kenji Lopez Alt
Uh-huh.
called The Wok,
Uh-huh.
and that's more Chinese techniques.
Uh-huh.
And I'm really interested in amping up my Asian cooking skills, in
Uh-huh.
particular my Chinese cooking. But what is so fun for me is that like I can go to work all day and then walk into the kitchen, and at this point, like I don't need cookbooks generally to like make whatever I want. So whatever I feel like I can make on any given day. And every weekend I go to like this awesome grocery store in Berkeley, Berkeley Bowl, and
Uh-huh.
get all these like beautiful vegetables and mushrooms and stuff. And so that's like my creative outlet.
Yeah, so very interesting. So, one of my previous guests was a guy by the name of Harold McGee. Do you happen to know who he is by any chance?
No.
So he's a food scientist. Okay.
Oh, cool.
So he analyzes food from a chemistry kind of degree. But one of the things he said was, which was quite interesting, I didn't know, but maybe you'll appreciate, is that he used to say cooking is like art and baking is like science because they're really different. So I'm just
Yes.
curious, do you do much in the way of baking, or are you really, because I understand the skills are really different.
Yes, I would totally agree with that. There is so much science and like precision in baking.
Yeah.
And if you can just commit to a recipe and measure and do whatever that recipe is saying in a baking, recipe, then
Yeah.
it's going to turn out great. But
Right.
I cannot do it. I'm not a baker. I'm a
I
terrible
see.
baker. My sister's really a good
Yeah.
baker, but I am more of
The
the cook.
cooking. Right,
Yeah,
because cooking is more like a little of this, a little of that, but
yes.
baking is like you can't do that because it gets all messed up and stuff like that.
That's right.
Yeah,
Like you
yeah,
can't mess with it. And I think with cooking, I'm using like sight and sound and
yes.
smell and taste. It's like and it's always like you're always tweaking things, like you said. But with baking, it's like just follow the directions.
Yeah, totally, totally.
Yeah.
Well, tell me how you. It's that's so interesting. So tell me how you end up from doing that to go to law school. I mean, that must have been a shift a little bit from doing that.
Yeah, it was like so when I graduated from undergrad at Berkeley, I moved to New York City right away and got my dream job, which was working at Human Rights Watch.
Hmm.
And I was there. So I graduated in May 2001. And so, of course, was in New York City when September
Oh,
11th
right,
happened
right.
and worked in the Empire State Building on the 35th floor and saw the World Trade Center burning.
Oh, wow.
And while it was obviously like the worst day, and just a terrible period of time for this country, to be in New York City and working at Human Rights Watch was such a privilege because they knew so much about global politics and what was going on in the Middle East and what the implications were of this attack that I learned so much, and all of these wonderful people were lawyers.
Hmm.
And so I
Hmm.
wanted to follow in their footsteps and
Hmm.
become a lawyer.
Hmm.
um, but then I found that it was difficult to get into that field professionally because there are very few paying human
Hmm.
rights attorney jobs. And so
Hmm.
I found myself looking in private practice and found that you could do food law, and was very lucky to have found that. And it's a really fun area that like marries a lot of my interests.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I was just going to ask you, was the food law just a coincidence? But it sounds like it's not.
Yeah, I remember preparing for early interview week and looking through the NALP directory at
Uh-huh,
all the different practice areas,
uh-huh, uh-huh.
and there were just a handful of firms that did talk about their FDA practice, including food. So a lot of firms have FDA practices that are focused on pharma or
Yeah.
healthcare, but there's a very small subset that also do
Huh,
food.
huh.
So that is what I focused
Oh,
on.
that's so interesting. Well, so tell me a little bit about that practice and what do you do? What is the food FDA? Like, what kind of stuff do you do?
Yeah, so a lot of it is regulatory compliance. So looking at food labels and checking for compliance with mandatory labeling elements, of reviewing the risk of claims. There's a lot of litigation that's arisen in the past 20 years. So I think when I started in this field in 2007, there wasn't such an active litigation bar for food cases, but that's really dramatically changed over the past several years.
Hmm,
So a lot of what I do is advising on litigation risk. I also help companies bring new food additives to market.
hmm.
There's a lot of interesting things going on in the Bay Area now around alternative proteins.
Oh, yeah,
So these
right.
are like, traditionally animal derived proteins
Yeah,
that can be manufactured by
yeah, right.
yeast cells instead of a
Mhm.
cow, or grown in a bioreactor instead of in a living animal. So these are really like exciting new foods that are emerging in the market. They're not on the market
Mhm,
in terms of cell-based products in the
mhm,
US yet,
mhm.
but Singapore is starting to approve products like this. So it's a really exciting time
Hmm. Now, do
for
you
food.
do both litigation and the compliance side, or you just do the compliance side, and then if there's litigation, you let other people handle that, or you do that as well?
It's more the latter. I mean, I am not a litigator, but I help our litigation staff like assess the strength of a plaintiff's claims.
Mhm,
Some of them make really esoteric arguments about regulatory compliance, and I can help
mhm,
to distinguish between like weak arguments and stronger
mhm,
arguments.
mhm. So, and then within food, like, is there even further specialization? Like, are the people that only just do dairy or only do meat products or only fresh, what are fresh things versus consumer products, or do you do all of it, or is there even further specialization?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say that I do a bit of everything. I think that you could find someone who's like a super dairy expert. I'm
Hmm.
not a super dairy expert, but I can review labels for dairy products. There are some distinctions between what we call raw agricultural commodities, which are like unprocessed whole fruits and vegetables, and things like chopped salads. There's
Mm,
different
mm,
jurisdictional issues
mm,
there.
mm,
But I do a bit of everything like organic,
mm.
rules, helping clients understand organic regulations. But yeah, I think that you can get pretty in the weeds in
Yeah.
certain subsets of food law.
Right. Now, do you have to actually go and visit the food processing plants and stuff like that to see what they're doing?
Yes, I do. I love visiting plants. It gives you a lot more insight
Oh,
into the
interesting.
details of the operation. So I've gotten to see mozzarella cheese being made. I've seen
Oh.
crackers being made, dietary supplement sort of liquids. So all kinds of stuff, and it's such a
Oh.
neat process. There's so much technology that goes into
Yeah.
these operations, and they're so like immaculately clean. It's really neat to see it,
Oh, and
come
you
together.
have to put on all, don't you have to put on like
Yes.
clean gear and hair masks and all that kind of stuff to go in? Oh, that's so interesting. And you must have to travel around the country for this, right? They're not all local, I'm assuming, right?
I have an easier time visiting with clients locally, but I have gotten to see a few operations outside of California too. I would love to do more. I always learn something by getting into the plant.
Yeah, that's interesting. So you pretty much cover, I mean, you've covered all kinds of foods. Is there one particular kind that is like the most interesting to you, or do you, like which one?
Yeah, I think that these new proteins are so interesting because I think that people, especially in the Bay Area, they might have like an aversion, let's say, to a genetically modified organism. And a
Yeah.
lot of these new technologies do use genetic modification. But they really have the potential to change the way we think about food, and to have an impact on some of the environmental effects of growing food. So, for dairy farming, like I understand there's lots of carbon emissions, from raising cattle. And I work with companies that have engineered yeasts to produce whey protein that is identical from a chemical standpoint to that same protein that's produced in a cow.
Mm.
And so I think, I hope that there will be more openness to these new exciting technologies. Like I've tried some of these products, and I like my palate is pretty good, and I could not taste the difference between
Wow.
this and like a dairy, a traditional dairy product.
Oh, interesting.
So that really gets me excited, and I would love to do more in this cell-based agriculture space where they're growing, like chicken breast in a bioreactor.
Right,
So
right.
there's no genetically modified source organism there. You're in this cell-based context, you are just taking a chicken cell and you're reproducing it in a bioreactor. There's so many brilliant scientists that are working
Mm,
to
mm,
make that process really efficient, and I'm dying to try those products. I haven't gotten to taste
mm,
one
mm.
of those yet, but I'm really excited about it.
Now, here's a question that's always befuddled me. Let me see if this is something you can answer. Is that how seriously should I take that sell by date?
Oh, the sell by date. Yeah. Yeah.
I
So,
never know. Does that mean that's the day I should throw it out, or is that the day
no,
that I should buy it by? I never know
typically
how
it's a
that date. I don't know how to interpret that.
it's a good question. Yeah, very, very good question. So there's a subset of products where like you do want to listen to the date on the product, like for milk, for
Uh-huh.
fresh dairy products, like listen to that, best by date. But for processed foods like Oreos or Hershey's chocolate syrup or a can of soda, or ketchup or something like that, the sell-by date is really the manufacturer telling you when the quality is going to start to be less. So it's not a safety issue. It's more that like it's not going to taste as vibrant. It's not going to, you know, maybe like the ketchup will taste a little bit less ketchup-y, but it's not unsafe for you to eat that ketchup.
Got it. Okay, well that's a big relief. So so now do you all, when you go to these plants and stuff, do you get to sample all the foods that when you go and visit them? I mean, that must be pretty fun too.
I do. I get to taste like the freshest cracker, you know, coming off the line, and you know, the freshest mozzarella cheese, and I get to try it like before it's finished too, so you can see how it's evolving.
Oh, yeah.
Like there's a stage in the mozzarella cheese making process before they add the salt, and like so I tasted that product without the salt, and it did have like a very like fresh milk taste, you know, that you don't get once it's salted. So yeah, that's a lot of fun.
That must be a super fun job. I mean, most lawyers don't get to take fun field trips like that.
I agree. I love it. I think it's, if you had told me when I was a kid that this is what I would be doing all day, I would have been thrilled. You know, I work on like candy and, you know, color additives and things like that. It's really fun. And, you know, I have every faith in, you know, FDA and like their ability to evaluate the safety of additives and things like that. There's a lot of mistrust about foods with, you know, ingredients that are difficult to pronounce and things like that. But everything I've seen over the past 20 years, like there's so much due diligence to really fully evaluate safety and, you know, all that, like color additives, like, you know, I love eating like beautifully colored candy, you know, nothing I've learned has detracted from my enjoyment of food and, you know, processed food and things like that. I enjoy all of it.
Now, here's a question. My girlfriend is very much into the keto diet. Is that an area that's regulated, or can anybody call anything keto? Because I noticed that seems to be a marketing thing where everything is all of a sudden keto, or is that regulated in any way?
Yeah, so that's not regulated. There's no formal definition for what keto is. So if a client asks me to assess a keto claim, I'm looking at like what the common understanding of that would be.
I see.
And to the extent a product doesn't meet like that common understanding of what a keto product should be, like is it that keto you don't want too many carbs? Is that right?
Exactly.
So like if one were to market a product as keto, and if it didn't have very much protein and did have a lot of sugar in it, then that product might face like a class action challenge, a litigation challenge. But it's not something that FDA would get into.
I see. But you have looked at, I'm sure clients have come to you about the keto. Yeah, okay, right.
Vegan, you know, that's not defined formally. Organic is. Those rules are administered by the U.S. Department of Agriculture. But yeah, keto, vegan, those aren't.
Do you actually also go look at meat farming, like cow processing and chicken processing plants and stuff like that?
You know, that would be interesting. I haven't had the chance to do that. I have visited fruit farms, but not animal like slaughterhouses and things like that, or egg farming. I'd like to. I think that those places can be a little stinky, so I'd have to like, you know, get some sort of, you know, something. But I wouldn't mind doing that.
Well, you sound like you're in a, obviously you really enjoy what you're doing. Have you ever thought about what, I mean, do you have any ideas of something else you might want to do in the future, or do you, any thoughts on that, or if you try to become a chef again, or any thoughts like that?
You know, I have thought about like maybe if I could retire and like volunteer to work at Benu, you know, and cut, you know, vegetables for them, or another like fancy restaurant. In San Anselmo, where I live, we've got a restaurant with Chef Ron Siegel, who's really impressive, and his restaurant's called Madcap. And I thought like it'd be fun to go in there and like help make sauces. I've also thought it'd be fun to work at Berkeley Bowl and, you know, learn about all that produce. But yeah, I don't think I would switch like legal, focus is at this point.
Well, one of my past guests was, do you know Phil Rosenthal? He's got that show Somebody Feed Phil on Netflix.
Oh yes, yeah.
Yeah. So he was really fantastic. He talked
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, and he walks around and tries food, and you've seen him cook and eat.
Yes.
Like that. He's a very fun guy. Yeah.
That's great. Yeah, I watched his San Francisco episode.
Oh yeah, right, definitely, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Natalie, it was so enjoyable chatting with you, and I enjoyed learning about the process and what you do. It's very rare. I haven't run into another lawyer who does what you do, and it was great to hear about your background. And if you do decide to do something else, it doesn't sound like it very soon, but please come back and tell me about it.
Okay, thank you so much. This is a lot of fun. Thank you.
This is Richard Hsu and Natalie Rainer. Thanks.